There's no way you can budget a development on a refurb through square metre costs. My recommendation is producing a schedule. Are you doing a full plaster? Are you stripping back to brick? Or are you just over skimming? Are you just patching from an electrical rewire? They're the wordings which are going to give you accurate sums. Too many people go into property development and all of a sudden they switch off a business brain. People say, well, why should I pay you to do a schedule, to do my development? I always say, would you go into business without a business plan?
Oh, what a show. That's Bristol out the way. Our next stop is Birmingham on the 16th of July. Then on to Manchester on the 10th of September, and we'll be finishing the year in Leeds on the 8th of October. Why would you attend the show? Well, we have multiple expert speakers, industry-leading businesses exhibiting, and ample opportunity to network with fellow developers and investors. The best thing? Tickets are free. You can book your ticket today by heading to our website, propertydevelopershow.co.uk. I look forward to seeing you there. Welcome to another episode of the Property Developer Show, the podcast. Today, I'm joined by Tony Walker from Help Build. Help Build Tony is a QS project manager.
Yeah, a bit of mixture of both, really. All things what people who don't like getting their hands dirty do. So yeah, for
amazing. Well, there we go. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Scott.
I appreciate you making a trip. So I'm going to dive straight into the action. How do you budget a refurb?
How do you budget a refurb? Wow, that's the big open question. Don't use square metre rates. Anybody who's listened to me any time before will be so... I'm not anti-square metre rates as long as they've come from somewhere. Mm-hmm. When I do presentations to people, I tell them, if you Google how much does an extension cost, it ranges from £1,000 to £2,000 difference. There's no way you can budget a development on a refurb through square metre costs. I think the best thing to do is if you have done a few, you can formulate your own square metre cost. And that's where you can get that through as an initial, is it worth even going to have a look at? Can I make those numbers stack? £2,000 or £2,400 a square metre for new builds or extensions, £1,000 for it comes into it. And you can't, that's such a varied response. A good example is I did at the presentation you showed last week, a 322 square metre new build came in at, I think it was £300,000 difference from the lowest answer on Google to the top answer on Google. I don't think many people make it anywhere near £300,000 profit off one new build. Yeah. My recommendation is producing a schedule. And it doesn't have to be anything complicated. Depending on the type of refurbishments you do, start to get a simple spreadsheet and put together windows, how many need replacing. If you've done developments before, look back, look at your historic. What a lot of people fall into is they do a development, they make some money and they move straight on. Mm-hmm. They don't then evaluate what did it cost against what they budgeted. Mm-hmm. So, the general developments we're talking about, a 3-bed terrace, semi-detached, 3-bed detached house, most windows fall within a very small bracket. A front door is a front door. A kitchen, if you're doing it in the same sort of area, you can come up with a budget. So why people still kind of guesstimate when they can formulate their own spreadsheet and start putting their own costs together, or employ somebody like me to look at it themselves.
There you go, nice plug, I like it. Great stuff. So in terms of like the intricacies then with sort of building a schedule per se, let's say blank canvas, I'm entering this property, what sort of things am I looking at? How am I going to try and factor in? What do I need to be factoring to contingency? What's the sort of play with that?
I think first of all, you've got to go into it and say, is this a quick in and out? Is this a new kitchen, new bathroom, new flooring, redecoration? Potentially new radiators. That's sort of like the lowest end you're potentially going to do. Then you've got to go down the route of actually, is it a full back to brick, complete rip out renovation? Because they're your two ends of a scale then. And then looking at that will determine where you go from there. I would 100% then start noting down everything. And then one thing I would say is if the structural issues, don't always jump into a typical property surveyor's report. I'd really recommend developing a good relationship with a structural engineer. The beauty about a structural engineer is they'll tell you actually what needs to be done. And then if there is a major structural issue, as in there's cracks forming in the walls for some underpinning, then you can go out to a contractor quite easily and get a quote for the structural works, because as soon as people see structural work, especially if they're inexperienced, they start to really get touchy and a bit worried about what that's going to entail. Sometimes it's not a lot, a day or two for a bricklayer to put some stitch bars into a crack and point them back up is sometimes all you're ever going to be able to do with that property. So if you're doing it as a development, you're more than likely not doing it for a standard residential mortgage anyway. So don't be scared. Rather than spending loads on a typical property report, maybe look down the structural engineer's route, and that might tick off your structural elements. And then you've got to determine what level you're going through. And your contingencies, I'd 100% go in a minimum of 10%. I work with quite a few finance companies, and I've had quite a few conversations with them, and they prefer people to over budget, over contingency on time plans. They'd much prefer you to not draw all the money than to draw all the money and ask for some more. So including a contingency at the start for both time and budget's really vital.
Yeah, of course. And I suppose the lender's looking at it from the perspective of, if we have to repossess this, can we deliver this within our margins that we've set? And obviously if people are over egging it in a way, which when I had the brokerage, we sort of found that with like experienced developers, i.e. they had their own building contracting firms, going back to what you're saying don't do, but if they could build out at 120 a square foot versus the norm, which is about 160 to 180 anyway, in that sort of region, the lenders are still, they're gearing to 160, 180 because they think, well, if we have to repossess this, where's our exit plan?
100%.
Versus obviously what you can practically, if you've got the infrastructure, maybe you can deliver it at 120 a square foot, but it's not practical from a market perspective.
No. And I think that's really important. Like I do a few budgets for people who do that, they're builders, and they do take the advantage on that they're going to have a better setup to deliver the project. However, they shouldn't base their figures on that, because that's a bonus to them. They've still got their overheads to pay as a construction company. So I always say to people, budget as if you weren't who you were, and you have to get people in to do all that side of it, and base it on main contractors, turnkey contractors, budget it on that. And then you're already steps ahead of the game, and you've got that contingency in plan.
Amazing. So in terms of, I suppose, you've got to the end of that stage. What are the next steps usually?
Next steps, obviously, then you've got to think about finding your team. Your team of people is so vital. And I often say to people that when you go out to find contractors, once you find a good one, whatever you do not let them go, because anybody who's done developments, anyone who's done their own projects and is employed contractors, you're going to go through a couple of bad before you get the good. Especially, there's two main routes to go, and you're going to go down a main contractor route, where you're going to meet with the contractor or give them ideally a schedule of works or a set of drawings, and you're going to go, make this happen for me. You're going to pay more, but if you haven't got the time, the experience, or the knowledge to deliver it as a project manager yourself, in the long term, you probably won't. So you go down the main contractor route, or you go down the route of subcontractors, where then you're going to get your electricians in, your plumbers, your plasterers, your decorators, and you're going to need to manage it. You may employ a project manager to do that, or you may manage it yourselves. It depends if you're doing a development as, your sideline for the year, or you're planning to do this as a business. So going out and finding your contractors, and when finding contractors, don't just go off word of mouth. I'll give you a really great example. I met somebody, no idea either of us what we were going to talk about, and I found out he's doing a home project himself. And he then realised what I did, and he went, "Can I ask you a question?" I was like, "Yeah, no problem." He said, "Should you do your own due diligence in finding out trades?" I went, "Yeah, why?" And basically, he'd employed a contractor to build his entire extension, except sort of the plumbers and the electricians, and it went wrong in the end, very wrong. But then he said, "Oh, I've got an electrician you can use, no problem at all." So he went on word of mouth and trusted him. After first fix, the kitchen fitters came in and went, "Something's not right here. Something's really wrong. The socket's in the wrong place." The kitchen fitters see a lot of this. And basically, it turned out that electrician wasn't qualified whatsoever. He knew how to do it, kind of, but he wasn't a fully qualified electrician. Wow. He went on the word of mouth of the general builder just because he trusted him. And what I say to people is, especially if you're a developer and you're doing this as a business, do your own due diligence. Just because your mate Dave down the pub said this electrician's quality doesn't mean he's going to sign off your work and get you the certificate needed. So for me, it's 3 steps. Personal recommendation is the first one, but don't just take someone's word for it. Then contact them. Ask them, can they see a bit of work? Can you speak to some recommendations? And always ask them for people who have completed the work, not just they're working for me. The completion's the key. Depending on the level of project is how far you go. Then do your own due diligence and make sure that they've got the necessary qualifications if needed, if they're gas safe, if they need to be, NIC, EIC, or similar for electrician. Trouble with builders is most of them don't have qualifications. They're old school, but make sure then you've dived into what they've done previously. And from there, you can go ahead with your project. My biggest thing, especially if you're comparing contractors, is comparing, because some contractors will come back with you with a one line and go, yeah, I'll do your project for 50 grand. Other people will do a full schedule. That's very, very difficult for you to compare like for like, especially if there's a big cost difference. From my experience, if there's a big cost difference, there's usually something wrong. Has contractor 1 allowed 10 grand for a kitchen, as contractor 2 allowed 20 grand for a kitchen? A windows included in one, not included the other. I think for a developer, I think you can control this by doing a full schedule of works. And I think I would always recommend of having the upper hand and not just relying on word of mouth and trust. Tell them what you want. Tell them the budgets you want to include for kitchens and bathrooms, and give them the schedule. And then that will eliminate, hopefully, problems further down the line.
Yeah. It's finding it's almost over planning in a way, isn't it? And making sure that even down to the what type of tile do you want in there, what color type, what kitchen, what level of kitchen, all of that sort of stuff. Because if you just say I want a kitchen, then the builder more than likely is going to price for the cheapest possible kitchen that they can find. But you're in a luxury high end HMO, that wasn't what you were aiming for. So I suppose it's all about communicating that through the schedule. So what sort of mistakes do you see people make when it comes to putting together a schedule and also a budget?
Wow, mistakes in terms of schedule. I think it's lack of knowledge, and that's not from anyone's fault. If you've not been involved in construction, putting together a schedule of works, it can be too broad. I think you've kind of got to understand the development and what you want to get from it. You don't need to be a qualified QS and list, we've all seen there's several paragraphs of how to plaster a wall. Let's face it, it's pretty standard. It's 12.5mm standard board and 3mm skim in most areas except, bathrooms, etc. But you don't need to go to that extent. But argument's sake, are you doing a full plaster? Are you stripping back to brick, or are you just over skimming? Are you just patching from an electrical rewire? They're the wordings which are going to give you accurate sums, because builders are busy, and this is not me slating builders. I've been working in with builders for years and years, and I used to be the one producing the quotes for our clients. And without any information, you put your own interpretation into it. And you can't compare like for like with that. So you need to be really clear. And I'll do it room by room. If it's only a 3-bed refurb, do it room by room. In the living room, we want to allow for overboard of the ceiling because it's horrible Artex. But then in the walls, we just want patching from the rewire. That's all. That's not a complicated thing to write. Yeah. And then, as you said, people with the spec of the kitchen. If you're a developer and you're going about this seriously, spec your own kitchen pre-tender. Or say you're going to supply the kitchen, with a plan of what it's going to be, so the builder can put in an install cost. And then things like that, tell them that if it's going to be granited worktops, they don't need to worry about that because that's a cost saving. If it's going to be chipboard worktops, tell them that. Just a really rough spec. You don't need to go into paragraph and paragraph and paragraph. But once you've done it once, if you're doing the same type of developments then on, you're creating your own schedule of works, which you'll just copy and paste through to the next one. So put all the work in at the front end and then go later on. And I think the biggest thing people make mistakes on is not looking at the whole project. Everyone forgets about landscaping. No one budgets for landscaping. The gardens are completely overgrown, no patio area, a dilapidated shed in the back of the garden. And they're all the little things what you get to an end and you turn to your builder and go, well, you're not returfing. No, but you just put an extension. Yeah, but landscaping there's nothing down for. Landscaping is a classic one if people forget.
Absolutely.
On a build, especially if you're doing general building work.
No, 100%. I have to say, hold my hands up that I've forgotten that a couple of times. So yeah, I can I can relate to that point.
100%. And if you're doing like even mid-range and you're putting sandstone or porcelain, you're talking £100 a square metre. You only have to put a 10 square metre patio in for you to be able to grand out straight away, and that's not including everything else. So.
It doesn't quite, it's just a curb appeal of property as well. It doesn't add the level of value that, a new bedroom or a new kitchen does. But it's just a necessary evil to have it done correctly. Otherwise, it does put people off on viewings. And if you're trying to put a tenant in there or trying to sell it and the garden's not finished, it's always a problem.
100%, especially fencing as well. Because if you are going into a property what needs refurbishment, it's highly unlikely you've had a fence replaced in the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
So you've got all that to contend with as well. Front driveway, front parking, anything like that. It's it definitely gets forgotten, but you could easily end up spending £5,000-10,000 on landscaping. But if you don't know what you want, at least stick a budget in there. At least put some sort of figure in there or an idea of what you want. 20 metres of fencing, 10 square metres of patio, new turf. It's a lot easier than forgetting about it.
Absolutely, 100%. So let's say ground zero, I've just done a property course. It was really great. I'm out viewing stuff. Without having to get 10,000 builders and annoy them, where do I start? How do I price a refurb?
How do you price a refurb? It's a really, really difficult one. If you've done nothing before, you're going to hit a wall here. And I would say, because nothing against the property courses, but no one talks about construction. And construction is once you've gone through the pain and the sales process and you're there, as you said, on day one and you're ready to start now, construction is going to make or break your project. It's whether you turn over a profit at all or not. And if you're inexperienced in it, it's so difficult to come up with those figures. And it's all area dependent. As you said, you start Googling, you start in your WhatsApp groups, you've developed a network, and then everyone has a difference of opinion. My thing would be is, and this kind of puts me out of business, so I don't mind saying it, is you need to really find a contractor or a builder you're going to work with. And if you're going into property development and you're planning on having buy-to-lets, you're going to need a handyman. You're going to need somebody on call. If you're not, hands-on yourself, you're going to need somebody. And I'd highly recommend building a relationship with a contractor who probably wouldn't mind, in exchange for a couple of beers on a Saturday morning, coming to have a look at a property with you and just giving their view on it. You're not asking them to full-blown schedule, but develop that relationship, because some time along this journey you're going to need somebody. Failing that is consult a professional. We offer the services where we will budget, and when we budget our developments, we do it from a construction background. We do it from where you're going to think about start to completion and completing that project. And it's worth you spending that small amount of money at the start and learning the process of how much a new window costs, how much it costs to have a plasterer for a day, how much it costs to fit a new kitchen, how much is a rewire, how much is a new boiler. If you don't know any of those figures, is employ somebody, a professional. That could be a QS, depending on the size of your project. It could be an estimating service like myself. And it could also be, a company, a project manager. Be honest with a project manager and talk to them and go, actually, I'd like to take you on for the next few projects because I'm learning. Me as a project manager, I don't mind that, because at least they're being honest with you and people are learning, and hopefully, you'll get a relationship going for life, but you're going to need to get help. As you said, otherwise you're going to spend the first 2 months meeting people at the property, getting down to, the property, showing them around, and then waiting for the quotes to come back. And then also what you'll find is, unless you've started developing relationships with contractors, it's really hard to get quotes these days because they're busy. They're really, really busy. And when I used to work for a contractor, unless you had the keys and you were ready to go, I hate to say, you were well behind the 20 people on the board who were ready for a quote. And that's what you've got to think about. Employ somebody for a small fee to help you understand the budget. But what you will have to do to keep your costs down, you still need to go around the property, take loads of videos, take loads of photos, and have an idea what you want to achieve. So if you are looking to create a bedroom or you're trying to add a bathroom, you need to have that information to hand. The more information you can provide somebody like myself who produces budgets, produces estimates, the less it's going to cost you to get that. If you can provide a spreadsheet with everything you want doing, I need 9 new doors, I need skirting throughout the property, it's complete redecoration, gives you as much information up front as possible.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's say they're they should go to you. Realistically, they should, or you, or someone of that capacity. That would be the best route. But let's say in this hypothetical scenario, someone tries to look for a contractor that they work with. What's the sort of process? Because I think going back to when I first started my own projects and stuff, obviously I was young, so they saw me coming a mile off. That obviously didn't help. But I went straight into bed with a cowboy builder because, they saw me coming a mile off. What sort of things could I have done to avoid that scenario? Where can I find good contractors? Because like you say, the good contractors are busy. They don't want to do quotes. The not so good contractors are available to start tomorrow. But when you're just starting out, you're eager, you want to get that first project going, you need to find a contractor, you need to get pricing, all these pressures are made up in your head, but they're there. How do you sort of navigate that if they don't come and speak to you, which they should?
They should come and speak to you. No, it's a really good question, Scott. The issue you've got is it's a big wide world, and I think what you've got to try and do first and foremost is stay to your area you're in. So try not to dive too far out of your area. And then, especially because most property developers now are in a network of people, speak to other property developers and find out who they're using. And really, you've got to be proactive. I think the trouble we're in now as a country, as a world, we rely too much on emails. We rely too much on the internet, and we hate speaking to people. And, I exhibited at the NEC. Sorry, Scott, it was another show, but not as good as yours. Yours is a lot different. People are more inclined to speak to you. But what I couldn't believe at the NEC was we were at the end of an aisle, and it was a mixture of self-builders and developers and contractors and everyone else. The amount of people who did not want to talk, and it wasn't just me. So it wasn't like someone could one look at me and go, "I'm not speaking to that yet, lad." You watch down the aisle, and unless it was something they wanted, they didn't even want to speak. Mm-hmm. And I think we're in that world now. But contracting and builders and tradesmen are not in that world. Mm. The way you get the best out of that is by speaking to people and actually having conversations with people. And, you saying to these builders, as you said back when you were younger, didn't quite know, did you go and visit these contractors on their own sites they're currently on?
I did, but the key bit that you mentioned was a completed project. They were midway through this 100%. Project. Yeah. It's
so easy. The horror stories, you'll never find... Sorry, not never. You'll very rarely find a contractor who doesn't ever turn up. What will tend to be happening is you haven't got a correct payment schedule, which I'll come on to in a second, and they'll take all the money in the first half. The second half isn't profitable. Now, what you probably found is they didn't do too much of a bad job. They didn't do anything majorly wrong, but they took all your money in the first half of a project, and then they weren't interested in completing. Mm-hmm. The biggest thing is find people who have completed projects and ask them to go and see them. And also don't do 10 years ago, because contractors love, resting on a project they did years and years ago. Find something that's been completed in the last year or two, and then go and visit that project and speak to the person, and also ask them what happened when it went wrong. Because if any contractor tells you, or any builder or anybody says nothing went wrong on that last project, it's not true, because building something always goes wrong. Ask them what the contractor did when it went wrong. It's great. It's the perfect thing. And a lot of people get stumped by that question. And just put your hands up and admit how you resolved it. It might not have been a contractor issue. It might have been a property issue. Ask those questions and go and speak to them, because when you've got that, the builder disappearing halfway through, hopefully will start. Now, when I come back to payment schedule, the amount of people who still tell me they've been asked to pay 50% up front. And they'll say to me, you see it on so many Facebook groups, is that right? And I'm there like, no, it's not. Why do you need 50% up front? What they're doing is funding the last project. Like, I hate to say, Scott, your first project. They're funding the bills we need to go back onto there. And people say to me, well, will I not get the right contractor if I say I want to do this payment schedule, or I want to do this? Well, if they're not interested in agreeing a payment schedule, then don't even enterprise going into partnership with them or doing whatever, your plan is with them. But you don't need to overcomplicate it. My preferred method will be to do evaluation. So that will only work if you've got a schedule of works with each item itemized. Agree evaluation period, but also make sure you side it with the builder. So don't do it every month. Do it every week or every fortnight. And pay the builder for what they have done. So if you know that your, for example, extension, that the groundworks that's section 1, more than likely they're going to complete that in the first 2 weeks. the builder can invoice that then and pay for it. And I always word it to people as, if it went wrong for whatever reason, a qualified surveyor or QS could come to site and they're happy that the client has paid the builder for the works done, whether it's material or labour. And then from there, you're never going to be too far into the project where you've paid too much out. You should have paid for the works, what's been scheduled. And then when you do evaluation payment method, it looks after both, because also on the flip side of it, contractors will tell you that they get to the end of a project and they never get their final payment. Now, everyone thinks builders are rich and they're driving around in Ferraris and pickups, but they're not. It's a hard industry, and I do back them up here. And the amount of contractors who still don't get their final payment, and most contractors profits in the final. They've paid the lads on site, they've paid the contractors, they've paid the materials. That last one is their profit to run the business with, and they don't get it. And this is why the bad reputation of contractors is both ways. With a valuation schedule, it's easy. They get paid for work they've done. So when it does go south, or if it goes south, you're in a really happy ground that you can actually shake hands and go, look, sorry, it hasn't worked out. You've been paid for what you've done. I've got the kitty left to go and employ someone else to do it. If you don't want to go down that route, you can do sort of agreed schedule. So if you're doing a new build, for example, you might agree a payment on groundworks, a payment on shell, a payment on roof, a payment on first fix. The only danger with that is just get somebody to look over it and check that it's not top heavy at the start, because again, you'll be in the same situation. As long as you feel it's fair, and by the time you've got 50% through the project, it doesn't always work 50-50 on the value, but you've got enough in it to complete.
Yeah.
Is go down that route as well. And that's how you make sure that you're on track with your payments. And when you come back to the question of how do I find a decent one, if your contractors are agreeing to things like this, it's really good green flags and there's no red flags there. They're happy to let you talk to previous clients. They're happy to discuss payment. Some people want to do labour only. Great, if you're going to supply your own materials. All I'd say is keep everything in writing and make sure that everything's backed up with in writing. It doesn't have to be official contracts in certain cases. It can just be an email. You're not going to go down a minor JCT contract if you're only doing 5 days of plastering, but get it in an email. I've agreed to pay you X amount for this works. This is what I'm expecting from it, and these are my payment terms. Be in control of it without being, you're not going to boss them around, but be in control of the situation.
I wish I'd met you before I did my first refurb.
Oh, that's nice, guy.
Just very quickly interrupting this episode, have you got a property deal in mind? Want to build or grow your portfolio but unsure how to obtain funding? No problem. At Roma Finance, they love to lend. The borrower first approach means Roma deliver flexible, tailored solutions that accommodate the diverse needs and experience of developers across residential and commercial projects. With a flexible criteria, Roma take time to understand each borrower's unique circumstances. Roma's attentive team are always equipped to handle and take on your requests. They will guide and support you throughout the property journey. Colleagues and customer relations are the beating heart of their business. Don't forget to explore Roma's website, romafinance.co.uk, for helpful resources, including articles and case studies to guide your financial decisions. Remember, Roma Finance love to lend. Your property goals are only a call or email away. Now back to the episode. It's funny because everything you're saying and everything you're saying don't do, I did. But I think it worked out in the end because I sold the property more than what I'd lost on it. But that's property for you. Prices obviously naturally go up over time. But I think you've covered so many important points, and I think it's such an underrated area. People just think, I'll just find a contractor and I'll just get a quote and pay 50% and they'll deliver it. Surely that's how it works.
Yeah.
It's just never that straightforward.
100% not.
And I think having that perspective, and obviously you're always going to make mistakes when you do something for the first time, but I suppose if you can listen to what you said today and mitigate some of those mistakes and be confident as well, I think that's probably a hard part.
100%.
Because these contractors will kind of sense it out a little bit if you don't know what you're talking about.
They will, and I think also that's where you've got to use your better judgment on it. And I think the trouble is people run a little bit scared of stuff like this. And the one thing I'd say is relationship is, and I could get shot for saying this, but relationship is more important than cost. And, I talk to a lot of contractors and they believe in this. if you get to the first, few meetings and you can't see yourself working with that contractor, you should call it a day straight away. Don't feel pressured into it, because a good relationship with your contractors and your builders is the difference when it goes wrong of it coming up with a solution. And building a relationship is so important. And also, if you're planning on doing this as a business, is making sure that then when you're on the next one, that contractor wants to work for you. And I'm not saying you have to be best friends, but, treating the lads to a butty now and again, taking them down the pub at the end of a project or when things go wrong, and being visible on site. Don't walk around with your head in your hands and not wanting to talk to anybody. Being visible on site will make the world of difference. And when you say confidence, that's really true. We can sniff a client out who doesn't know the score like a mile off. And you don't have to understand the construction process. You don't have to understand how to put a roof on. But when somebody on site's going, can I just check, is this roof light going here? You having that snap confidence back, whether you've got to go on your iPad or, get the drawings out and just go, yes, but you don't have to go, I don't know. That will lead to, well, if we just bang it here, no one's ever going to know it's any different.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of confidence. Know your project. And that's really important, especially if you're doing anything more than just a simple refurb. Understand it. Know what specification, know what doors, know what skirting. You don't have to be qualified. And I think you need to run it as a business. And I think too many people go into property development and all of a sudden they switch off a business brain, which amazes me, because if you should be running it as a business.
Absolutely.
And when people say, well, why should I pay you to do a schedule? To do my development, I always say, would you go into business without a business plan? 9 times out of 10 now, you don't. Your scheduler works and your costings is your business plan for that development.
Absolutely.
And that's what you should go to.
Yeah. I think people make the mistake of being too fixated on the numbers.
100%.
In the sense of, I need 20% margin. That's what I've done my, very generic back of the paper type calculations, because you can never factor in all the costs before you acquire something and then start delivering it. And I think people get too fixated and fixed on, well, if I spend an extra $2,000 on getting QS and a project manager in, then that's going to effectively give me 18% margin or 19% margin. And I don't really want to do that. So and it's like I said before, we started the podcast, you only need it when you need it. And it's a bit like insurance, like having a project manager
100%.
or a QS or a schedule. You might go 2 or 3 projects where things go quite smoothly, and then something might trip you up, and then you're like, now I can see why I should have invested that money into having the proper schedule done, having a PM, having the right principal contractor. Obviously, go through levels of how that looks, but I think it's a mindset in itself. And I do think, unfortunately, despite us talking about it here, you do need to probably make a few mistakes and get burnt a little bit for you to realise, actually, I should have probably listened to Tony on that podcast.
100%. 100%. And I think if you go back to business, me and you both, Scott, run a business, and sometimes we make decisions and we go, okay, if I break even on that, or if it costs me a little bit, it's part of the learning process of running a business. But you don't get that same mentality in property development.
No.
Like, I'd love someone to say to me, like, all we're looking to do on our first one is break even. Just come away with it, but we're going to learn on the first one. We're not just going to get to the end and go, I'm not doing that again. Can't go to on holiday now next year. You need to look at it as your business. And I think if you can learn and talk to project manager, and one thing I'm investigating setting up is almost like that. What happens when it goes wrong? Can I have a project manager on call? Can there be a field of knowledgeable people? Because there are people out there. There are guys who have done construction for 20, 30 years who will have the answer. And this is when you start to network within property, that you start to find these people. And it is probably somebody who would give you a day of their time to help you get out of that situation. Especially when you come onto the realms of building control and the responsibilities. It's falling back on the client now. And without the understanding, it's very, very difficult. And I think the trouble is we can always sound negative and go, well, you shouldn't do this, and because if you listen to all the negative side, but you've got to understand the construction project process. Unless you're going to go, actually, I don't want that 20% margin, I'm happy on 10 and I'm going to have a complete hands-off approach. That's completely different. But most people don't want to go down that route. They want to go down the full on, I am a project manager. Well, that's great, and I'm not saying you can't do that, but learn from people to start with. And invest 5-10% on your first few to make sure that, when you're 4 or 5 in, you are making the higher mortgage. Because as you said, you've learned from your mistakes. And that contingency is your mistake kitty of when, I've absolutely dropped there. And you know what, but I'm going to be able to remember that next time. And that's when you've got to look back and learn from it.
Absolutely. So to, I suppose, round what you've just said off and round the episode off, what key bit of advice would you give to someone that is looking to price a refurb and then deliver it?
Don't be naive with it, and don't just, and I think the lenders will tell you this as well, that if you're a first-time property developer or very, very inexperienced, you can no longer go to a lender and ask for 200 grand with a fag packet calculation. So that is telling you where the industry is right now. So I think the biggest piece of advice I can is understand your construction costs and learn from it. So learn from it after project, and use that to formulate your own metre square rates. So learn from, right, if I've done the last 4, these are the sizes, these are what's cost me. But then don't take the difference of £500 a square metre based on your over, go, okay, actually in a condition like that, I need to be around that. In a condition like that, I need to be around that sort of figure. So understanding your construction costs is my first one, is understand what they are. Generically, installing a gas boiler is installing a gas boiler. You know, installing a new roof, you can start to formulate that. So understand your construction costs. And then my second bit is relationships. Relationships are key across, but they tend to stop at we've got the keys, what do we do now? Find your contractors who care and keep them. That's my biggest thing. Is find a contractors, whether you've got an electrician, plumber, plasterer, builder, whatever it will be. Harness those relationships and almost, get together your A team of people you're going to turn to. And if you look after them, pay them on time as well. If you've agreed to pay them in a term, don't you also go back, because you also see that pay within terms. And that contractor, next time you pick those keys up, give them a call, say, right, I've just got this property, get the keys in 8 weeks or get the keys in 12 weeks. Are you on board? Because if they've had a great experience, they're not going to really want to work for other people as well. They're going to want to work for you. So understand your construction costs and build your relationships.
Amazing. I love it. I mean, I've slowly built that list over the I bought my first property, God, what would it have been now? 5 years ago, next month, I think. 23 I was. No, just turned 24. I'm 29 next month. So during that period, I've the good contractors have stayed with me.
Yeah.
And I've just kept giving them bigger work and more work as sort of time's gone on. And then the not so good ones I don't know what they're doing now, just put it that way. And I think you've got to slowly build that list of people that you can 100%. Trust. And then they realise, and probably helps that I've got older and wiser and all that sort of stuff. And they realise that, if I do a good job for Scott, there's more work down the road. And that's sort of your bargaining tool, isn't it? In a way, for if you're a developer, it's not just this project that I'm going to be doing. Yeah. I'm thinking about buying property until I drop dead, essentially. Yeah. So there's essentially work pretty much every 100%. Year for the next 50 years, depending on how old you are.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah.
Definitely. And from that as well, contractors won't be adverse to maybe going in with a bit of a profit share as well, because they care then what the else, I wouldn't jump in on your first development, but after a few, you could always have that conversation going, actually, you interested in a small profit share, coming in with me, because then you do have a dream team, especially if you want to remain hands-off. That if you're a hands-off approach and you don't want to be the person stripping the plaster off the walls to save a bit of money, then start to harness those relationships, and actually could it become more of that?
Brilliant. All makes sense. So in terms of, I suppose, if people want to get in contact with you, and you do have an online course as well, don't you, that pretty much goes into this, but in a lot more detail. How can people reach out? And do you want to give a bit more information on the course as well?
Yeah, so basically this year, what we decided to do was, as a business, how can we help more people build? And that's what we decided to do. So we've done an online course, and it's basically very much like what we're talking about now. If you've ever seen me do a presentation, it harnesses all my knowledge, and I put it into, it's about 5 hours worth of footage, and we're developing it as well weekly, where it's all bite-sized to take you from, right, you found a property, how do I get it through to completion? And we talk about all the processes involved, the different people you need, structural engineers, architects, how to buy materials, how to find contractors. And we give you loads of resources in spreadsheet format, nothing complicated, Excel spreadsheets already formatted for you to time plan, budget plan, compare materials, find contractors. So if you want to contact us, it's help@helpbuild.co.uk, or we're all over social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, etc. If you search Help Build, and the course is usually 249. It's an introductory course at the minute. It's very new, but a lot of property developers are taking it on board, and it helps you understand the process. But if you message me with podcast, I'll know you've watched this, and I will do the offer which I offered at the Property Developer Show last week at 149, and that's 5 hours of footage, all the resources, and it will give you the understanding of construction for your development. And people who buy the course as well, I'm always on hand if you want to drop me a message, and we'll see how we can help you.
Super. This ad was brought to you by Help Build.
Perfect. new line of work for me.
Great stuff. Well, yeah, appreciate that, Tony. And some really insightful stuff today. So hopefully people have drawn some early information that will help them not make very costly mistakes in the long term.
100%, and always learn from them.
Good stuff.
Thanks a lot, Scott.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Obviously, a lot of insights to pricing a refurb and also delivering it, because it's a lot of, it's something that does trip me up when I first started, sort of jumped in feet first, just kind of making it up as I was going along. But if I'd known what Tony was talking about today, probably wouldn't have made as many mistakes as I did so early. So thank you very much for tuning in. As I always say, please do like and subscribe, and do leave a review on the audio version so we can continue to get amazing guests like Tony. Thanks very much.
Cheers, Scott.
See you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.